Hi, it's good to be with you all. Can't see you, but just to be with you on this Good Friday. Such a funny title when we're celebrating Jesus' death. Good. Happened on a Friday, but being good. Every good story, it has a climax that builds. I think of the Lord of the Rings, it's building and building to this ring being destroyed, and kind of the story culminates with the ring being thrown into this fire that's going to destroy it, and it's the climax of the story, and then it kind of finishes after that. Or you think of a great romance, and the climax of the story is building and building and building towards this couple to express their love to each other. It's the same in the story of Scripture. Often we can see all these different stories, but it's actually one overarching story that is building and building and building right from the very first words to the cross. And this is the climax of the story. Jesus carrying the cross and making his way and being hung on that cross. It is what all of Scripture is building towards. And it's because it's a king finding victory. That seems really counterintuitive to us. A victorious king is someone who marches on a horse and maybe has prisoners behind them. A victorious king is wealthy. A victorious king has tons of fans and people cheering him on. Jesus on the cross was the complete opposite. But that's what Good Friday, that's what the climax of the story is. Jesus turning things and making them almost upside down. Because when he died on the cross, that was him gaining victory over evil, over injustice, over this separation between us and God, and so that there was this restlessness, this sense of things not being right. Because of what Jesus did on the cross, there can now be wholeness and peace and things put back to how they were supposed to be. The Christian word, the theological word for that, we would call is salvation. But it's this idea of because what Jesus did, we can now know what it means to be truly human, to be in the image of God. And so what I'm encouraging you to do this Good Friday is to gather with whoever's in your house, whoever it's appropriate for you to be with, so the people you've been with in your homes. So it might be a spouse, it might be parents, it might be children. And this is what the early church did. It was much different than what we do now traditionally in our churches. See, in our churches now, communion is about, in our context itself, is we come forward and we grab a little cup and a little piece of bread, and we remember what those represent. It's not necessarily a bad thing, but this is an opportunity. Let's not see this as a bad thing where we're all kind of self-isolating. I'm saying this Friday, can you take a meal? This is what the early church did, is they would gather in a home and they'd sit around the table and they would remember Jesus. They would start to, eat and talk about Jesus and the things of Jesus. And this is what I want to encourage you to do, is take a moment and sit down and just start to talk and tell stories of Jesus. What does Jesus mean to you? What has Jesus done for you? What's a story of Jesus that you love? What does Easter represent to you? Start to have good Jesus conversations. Maybe look at the person across the table from you and say, what has Jesus been telling you lately or showing you lately? It's a great question. But that is communion, together over a meal. And so I want to encourage you this Friday, maybe even Saturday, take a moment and do that over a meal. Just talk about Jesus and what he's doing and the things and who he is for you. And then in the midst of that conversation and that meal, just like they would have in the early church in the book of Acts, pause and break some bread and whatever you're drinking, glass of water, milk, whatever it is, use that drink to remember Jesus. This is what Paul was telling the church in Corinth to do when he gave them the instructions in 1 Corinthians chapter 11 on how to partake in communion. Now, they were doing it wrong, and Paul was doing some corrective teaching. So they'd come to this meal, and what would happen is it became the haves and the have-nots. The people of wealth would eat all the food, and so the people that were maybe a little struggling had no food. People would drink way too much wine and get drunk, and other people wouldn't even have any wine at all. And so Paul was saying, you're missing the point. This isn't about you. This isn't about your stomach or your taste buds. This is about Jesus, the climax of the story. This is about the victory of Jesus and all that he's about and what he did on that cross. And so he said this, let me go over with you again exactly what goes on in the Lord's Supper and why it is so centrally important. I received my instructions from the Master himself and passed them on to you. The Master Jesus, on the night of his betrayal, took bread. Having given thanks, he broke it and said, this is my body broken for you. Do this in remembrance of me. And so I encourage you, find some bread or whatever you have in the meal. And this idea of breaking, of what that represents, and talk about it at your table. What does that mean? Jesus' body being broken for me. What does sacrifice mean? How does love look like when it's sacrificial? Talk about the sacrificial love of Jesus and what he did for you. And then Paul carries on. He says, after supper, he did the same thing with the cup. And so this is a little while later. They're done eating, and it's almost like it's dessert time. And he takes the cup. And Jesus said, this cup is my blood, my new covenant with you. Each time you drink this cup, remember me. This idea of remembering me. He says, take it, drink it. And remember me. This idea of covenant. It's not a word we use very often anymore, but it's about this. It's the promise you make with your wedding vows. It is a promise that is so deep and strong that nothing is supposed to break it. And a covenant is a promise between you and God. But it's God making the promise to us, so it'll never be broken. And he's saying, this is the new covenant, the new promise I have for you. I will love you. You'll be my children. I will sacrificially love you. This is what I did on the cross. It is for you, sacrificially loving you so you could be in right relationship with God. And so talk about that. What does that mean for you? Is a promise like that important? Promise that God can't, won't break? I think it's important in these moments to have these conversations. Instead of having someone like me or another pastor just talk and teach, I think it's important for you to reflect and talk and read maybe the passage in 1 Corinthians 11 or going into the Gospels of Matthew and John and reading the story of this Last Supper and discussing them and you thinking about what does this mean for you? Jesus for you, what does that mean? So I pray that this Good Friday would be a day where Jesus becomes more real to you. I pray that this Good Friday would be a day where your love and understanding of Jesus' love for you is so much richer and stronger. I pray that you would know the climax of the story of God more fuller. That Jesus died for you. That it doesn't become this quaint saying, but an actual realization that because of what he did on the cross, you can know what it fully means to be human and to be loved by God and to love God. So take time and reflect and talk and pray to Jesus this Good Friday. And then we get to see you on Easter Sunday.